John 21:15 through 19. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go." This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, "Follow me."
I think there's two things that I particularly enjoy when flying: takeoff and landing. Those are the two things, just takeoff and landing. I inevitably do not buckle my seatbelt for takeoff because I want to be able to feel the movement and exhilaration as we take off. And I try very hard to follow the flight attendant's rules about buckling your seat when you're landing, but I prefer not to do that as well, because if you don't buckle your seat, you kind of fly forward at the same time. But as we're coming down and you land, you get to the point where you're taxiing. And if you ever go to Chicago Airport, I think they taxi across the entire state. But you taxi, and you're going through. And you watch everybody in the plane, and their eyes all transfixed onto the little seatbelt light, right? Their hands are on their buckles. Their fingers are trigger ready. They're like, when will it go off? And then suddenly, ding, and it's like July 4th, and all these buckles are undone. I often have undone my buckle multiple times just before that sound, so that the flight attendant will say, "Will you please stay buckled?" But, just for the fun of it. But they all unbuckle, and then they jump up. And they all bash each other, smash each other, because we got so much luggage to carry. People are knocking each other over. And then the plane, realizes that the airport has not found anybody to open the gate yet. And so then you're standing there, and United, which is what I fly often, will often then decide to recycle the oxygen and switch it off. So then there's this audible like, "Oh," as we're in the plane and the heat is building up and the door's not open and everybody's standing with their luggage saying, "Yeah, could you get my bag? Could you get my bag?" And then we all go off. And I love watching people's reactions to this, because they're all trying to get off there. We rush through security, we get through passport control, and then we arrive at the inevitable belt of joy, as we stand there for 5 days waiting for our luggage to arrive. And if you're with United, it never does. And so then you have to contact them, and like Sam, you wait 6 months, and eventually the bag comes by, But that's what happens. You just wait there, and watching these people is so amusing. It's just so much fun for me, especially when I'm not in a hurry. When I'm not in a hurry, then I enjoy it even more. Then you get out and you go probably to a car like I do, and you're going to drive home. And this is the one time when you feel to yourself, "I have freedom, and I'm going to zip through the lanes and change and honk my horn and flash my lights, and I'm going to go as fast as I want to go, because I'm going home, and I'm in second gear crying, 'Freedom!'" And as I'm doing this, I'm thinking to myself of two members in my church, two friends of mine, Brian Wernick and Eli King, who've both suggested that we should create a logo and maybe make a little sticker and put it on the back of our cars. And I'm thinking, what kind of impression if I had a sticker on the back that said, "Live Love," on the back, Boulder Seventh-day Adventist Church, as I'm zipping through the traffic, honking the horns, cutting everybody up, saying, "Freedom!" But that's what I think of Peter. When I think of Peter, I think Peter, if he had ever gone through an airport today, like we go through airports, I mean, he would have probably been the alpha male that he was, being the crazy character that he was, being the leader that he was, being the risk taker that he was. He probably would have said all the things that you and I think every time we fly. Why? Oh, why is there a TSA? I have no idea. I mean, seriously, I went through in July, and I had Erin Hannah's boarding pass as well as mine on my phone. She had her own as well. And I forgot to swipe over my boarding pass. I went through TSA with her boarding pass and my driving license. I know, we're identical twins. Tongue, I think that was the story yesterday. All right, so, I mean, this is the thing that I don't know why we have TSA. And Peter, I'm pretty sure if he went through, he would have been arrested. He would have told passport control what he thought. He would have told TSA what they thought. And then I wondered to myself, Jesus, why would you want Peter to have a sticker on the back of his donkey saying Christianity? I mean, what if Peter was the only person that you met who was going to introduce you to Christianity? Would you say, I'm going to join that church. I'm going to join that tribe and that faith because Peter, I mean, he's not the kind of guy that you would want to be able to do this. Yet for some reason, Jesus saw a tremendous amount of potential inside this guy and believed that this guy was going to do something amazing inside here. Peter was indeed a crazy guy, but he was also the kind of person who told Jesus things that he felt Jesus was doing wrong. He had a kind of a je ne sais quoi quality about him. I only say it in French because you can't say it in English, otherwise it'd be rude. But in French, you can say anything, and people believe you. That's why we love them. And so, you just he had this kind of je ne sais quoi attitude, like, I don't know, Jesus, I think you're wrong. I think your ideas are not right. And Matthew records only one instance, but I'm pretty sure Peter had many more of these instances where he was constantly correcting Jesus Christ. Because we struggle with the same thing. I mean, do we say the same to Jesus sometimes? Jesus, maybe there's a better way of doing this. Several years ago, I was in this church, and we had this particular guy, friends of ours, who was going to become a leader in the church, but he was married to a lady who didn't belong to the church in the sense that she wasn't a baptized member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And I remember the church went through this huge kerfuffle about it and said, well, you can't have this guy be a leader. His wife is not Adventist, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I remember visiting them in their home. And she said to me, nobody ever asked me. All this time passed by. Nobody ever asked me, do you want to get baptized? Do you want to study? Do you want to understand? And I vowed that day, I said, I felt absolutely mortified. Because I was super PC, politically correct, very, very careful about how I'm going to present faith. But I was like, I should have asked you. And it was terrible. And I didn't ask. And I said to myself, maybe that's because I thought I had a better way to follow Jesus than what Jesus was actually asking us to do. And this is the struggle that I think we have all the time. But Jesus, seeing this incredible potential in Peter, Peter was the person who walked out onto the water. I mean, a few seconds. He walked out on the water, walked on water. He was the one who was in the inner circle of leadership with Jesus. He went on the Mount Transfiguration and saw Moses and Elijah there. I mean, he was close to Jesus. So the night of the fire, when he's sitting in the courtyard, and he's there with all these other people, and Jesus is being tried, never for once did Peter ever think to himself, could it cross his mind that this guy who had walked on water, who had seen Elijah and Moses, who had declared that Jesus was the Christ, the Messiah, would ever deny Jesus? Maybe once, but not 3 times. And through that fire and through those embers, he denies Jesus. And yet, his friend, John, the little young guy inside the disciples, because Peter was the seasoned guy inside the disciples, John was a young neophyte inside the disciples, he stood at the foot of the cross of Jesus. And Peter, the seasoned leader, was in hiding. So when you get to John chapter 21, and you'll need your Bible, so I encourage you to pull them out in front of you if you don't have one. Pull out your Samsung phone, and good luck finding a reception and making that work, or your iPhone, and good luck, enjoy that. And so pull out your Bibles, we'll need this because in John chapter 21, when you finish John chapter 20, you think the whole book of the Gospel of John is finished. It says in John chapter 20, verse 30 there, it says, now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Amen. Done. Finished. The book is done. But the Peter and John tension still existed. So we have this appendix, chapter 21, which is what we're going to look at today in particular, because I think this gives us a real insight into the Peter and John tension and who Peter was and how his relationship was with Jesus and what that means for us as well. It says here in verse 3 of chapter 21, Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. This is what he's going to do. He said this because he was going to his pre-Jesus existence. When things go wrong sometimes with God, you think to yourself, I don't know, I've done this sin, I've messed up really bad, and sometimes you're scared to go back to God for some crazy reason. You think that God won't forgive you, or he won't accept you, or he won't love you. And so you go to your pre-Jesus existence, which is what Peter did. You lapse back into some old lifestyle. And he says, oh, you know what I need to do? I'm depressed. I don't know. I'm going to go back fishing. And he goes back fishing, and the Bible records here that they said to him, we will go with you. Isn't that great community? That's what church is. When you're depressed, sometimes what you have to do is just do something normal, right? Get up, out of bed, take a shower. It helps us. You know, be friendly with somebody. And you can actually support somebody when they're down and out by being their community and going with them. And that's what they did. So they'd step out there, and I'm pretty sure John would have said to Peter many times, come on, Peter, of course Jesus forgives you for what you did that night. You knew him. We know him. Of course he would. But Peter's so depressed. He goes out fishing, and they go out there. Verse 4 says this, they go out and they caught no fish. So he went to his old pre-existent self, pre-Jesus self, and he finds no luck at all inside there, no fish. And then this guy called Jesus stands on the shore, calls out to them and says, hey, have you caught any fish? The Bible records here they said no. He tells them to throw it on the other side of the net. They catch a whole load of fish here, and they couldn't haul it in. Then verse 7 says this, the one whom Jesus really loved. I love how John describes himself. It's a little biography every single time. He just wants to make sure that you know of all the disciples, he loved me. So he said, the one whom he could never say his name, said to Peter, it's the Lord. If he was in London, he said, oi, mate, it's Jesus. That's what he would have said. He would have just cried out and said that was Jesus. And Peter is so excited that it's Jesus that he dresses up because he's in panic mode. Because he's like, I want to talk to Jesus. And I want him to forgive me. And I want him to embrace me like he did before. And I just don't know how to approach him. I don't know what to do about this. And so he dresses up. He puts his suit and tie and shoes and laces and then jumps into the water, which is very wise. So then he's swimming in all of his clothes, arrives at the shore there, and Jesus doesn't say anything to him. Because you see, Jesus had already forgiven him. Jesus knew it. He warned him about it. I mean, Jesus understood what Peter was. In fact, what Jesus does, he says, you know what we should do? We should eat. We were in a staff meeting not too long ago this week, and Jessica suggested that we should climb a few 14ers as a staff, group building exercise. No. I said there are many team building exercises. We could have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We could have a tea time, a snack, but the idea of a 14er is like such a bad idea for team building because the team will not be up there. There'll be 2, 3 of them up there, and the rest be like, how does it fare? Down here on radios, it's okay, I agree, that's what we should do at the church. No. But Jesus understood food. He did. In fact, actually, he was accused of being a glutton because he did so many social gatherings, so many conversations always around food. There's something about sitting around each other, breaking bread. There's a reason why when we do the Lord's Supper and communion, we break bread. We physically break bread. We eat together and we fellowship together. And he did this. He made them eat. And you know, they say, the studies show us that if you as a family sit down 2 to 3 times a week as a family, that means family is just, by the way, in case you're not sure of this, involves parents and children. I know some of you think parents, that it's just you, but that's because you're in recovery. But it's parents and children together. If you sit and eat a meal 2 to 3 times a week together around a table with no devices, you're actually going to create stronger family bonds for the rest of your life. God understood this. So he makes breakfast for them. They're cooking it. They eat it. And then we get to the verses that Patty read so beautifully for us in verse 15. When they finished this, Jesus seeing inside Peter what's going on because there's turmoil. He wants to be accepted. He goes and says to him 3 times, if you love him. And we know the story really, really well. And Peter's mortified by this. And this is because Jesus is saying to him, this is how serious love is. It's not flippant, it's not simple, it's probing and demanding and unwilling to settle for flip answers. It's going to be one of your questions in the recalibrate time. When you talk about love, you need to have action with it. Hence he says, feed my lambs, take care of my sheep, feed my sheep. That's what he's saying all the time, over and over and over again, because Jesus is saying, look, the sheep are the people we look after. Peter, I am the good shepherd. And I'm going to take this responsibility of being the good shepherd and share it with you. And you are going to share it with me. And your responsibility, our responsibility collectively, is to look after the sheep, to feed them, to love them, to actually have action behind our statements and not do this. I've had people come up to me sometimes and say, different churches, and they'll say things like, Pastor Japhet, why don't you just be Japhet, you know. You don't have to be pastor with us. Just hang out with us. Be a brother with us, just be with us. And I kind of explain to them as best as I can that being a pastor is like a huge hat that I wear that's attached by super glue to my heart. I don't want to separate it because it's who I am. Sometimes it's working well, sometimes it's not, but it's a huge hat. It's like a 10-gallon cowboy hat with fruit on top of it. You know, the kind of, you want to see? It's like huge bananas and strawberries and all sorts of delightful things on top of this 10-gallon hat. You can't ignore it. And every time you accept the call from Jesus, you too have a hat. It's right there. People see it over and over again. In these verses here, at the end of it, Jesus explains to Peter very clearly what's going to happen to his future. And as he says this to him, he says, look, but this is what I want you to do. I want you to simply follow me. And I want you to put on this hat, and I want you to keep it real inside here. Because there is tension in the kingdom. The last 5 verses of John chapter 21 explain all this tension out, because this is actually the tension we have in our church communities, in our families, all the time. It's called the comparison game. See, Jesus and Peter are walking along, and as they're walking along, Jesus is explaining to them, and I noticed this, that they're walking on level ground. Level ground, Jesus is explaining to them and says to Peter, this is what I want you to do. Peter turns around, sees the disciple that Jesus really loves, John, and he says to him, well, you told me what's going to happen to me. What about John? And Jesus is like, what do you mean, what about John? And this is where we compare ourselves. We compare ourselves all the time in church. We're constantly comparing ourselves. We even compare ourselves about the order that things happen in our services. Like, well, I think it should be here instead of here because this is where more people are. And this kind of crazy stuff that really is not inside the kingdom of God. We compare ourselves how we parent our kids. We compare ourselves how we actually are leaders. And we create tension in our heart because we're not comparing ourselves or staying connected with Jesus. We're not following him. What we are is looking to other humans and defining everything through other humans instead. And God is saying to us, this is what it is about. In fact, actually, by the end of this whole entire story, he says to him in verse 23, if it is my will that he remain, and this is a great text about John, until I come, what is that to you, Peter? What is that to you? Ultimately, what is Jesus saying? He's saying that you can look to everybody else and your faith will crumble. What I need you to do is to keep your eyes focused on Jesus, and he will take you through everything. You will belong to communities because you know that you have your eyes on Jesus.